Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hacking Education, the podcast that seeks creative solutions for an education system that is falling short, meeting these demands of the new world. Today, we have the honor to be with Juan. Juan is awarded the best sommelier of 2023 from the Atlanta Michelin Guide. And Juan, thank you for being in the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Um, in the podcast, I want to see if you can tell us what a sommelier is. I know that some people are familiar with it, but not everybody is.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about it. I'm grateful that you brought up the subject because there's actually that's a matter of great debate within people in the organization. There is a educational resource that we use within our guild called the Guild of Sommeliers, and that is something that came up in the forum a while back. Like, what exactly is a sommelier? And that's one of the things about this career that can be a little bit like polarizing, or it's just a little complicates things a little bit, because I guess by some definitions, a sommelier is someone that works on the floor of a restaurant, and their job is to sell wine and to pair wine with food and to be an asset to the restaurant and to provide the guests with a better experience. That is one way to look at it. But a lot of people that get into this industry quickly move into other facets of it. You might go work, you might open a wine shop and be a wine merchant. You could possibly work for a distributor if your state is set up in a system that has distribution set up that way. You could also possibly work for an importer. You could go work in education. People go and just become certified as a sommelier, or get the credentials one way or another, and then we'll go and work as like a writer. So there's a lot of there's a lot of people say I'm a sommelier, but I don't work in a restaurant. I don't personally have an opinion. I'm not going to say like it is what it is. I mean, we're talking about wine experts one way or another, but I think the term sommelier is most often referred or associated with someone who works in a restaurant, and that's something that when I first embarked in this career, which I had already worked in restaurants for a long time in my life, and then I took a hiatus from my restaurant career, and then when I came back to it, that's kind of when I found out about it. And to me, it was fascinating because it kind of brought together everything that I've always, not everything, but a lot of the things that I've always found very interesting, which is hospitality, food, and wine.
I was under the impression, and I heard from the award ceremony, that a sommelier is also seen as a director, as an orchestra director, somebody that can put together a fantastic meal with a fantastic drink. Okay. Mm-hmm. Also, the reason why I have you in the podcast is because, to me, a sommelier has to learn based on senses, based on the way that food smells, textures, then the combinations of those two. So I was going to ask you about your upbringings and how you started using your senses to pair food and wine.
So, I feel very lucky that I had a very unique childhood, and I think that definitely put me on the path at a very young age. So I grew up in Cali, Colombia. My father has a hotel outside of the city. If you're Colombian and you are from Cali, you've probably either seen it or been there. It's behind the hacienda where Jorge Sachs wrote La Maria.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
And it's called Hostería El Mesón de la Sierra. And it's built like a beautiful European castle in the Colombian mountains, in the Andes Mountains. And so I grew up spending my summers there and my weekends there. And then in the week, I would go to Cali because I went to school there. So I got to kind of experience the city. Then I also got to be raised in a, when I was a kid, we called it our finca.
Okay.
Even though it was a hotel. But we had horses, cows, chickens, ducks. My father had a lot of orchards. He had a lot of guayaba, a lot of toronja, a lot of grapefruit, a lot of orange trees.
This is one of the things that we're always losing, and I feel with my kids, and then it's like this, working with hands, working in farms, and then coming back to the way that you increase the senses to be able to pair these foods. What were some of the experiences that you had with some like fish or toronjas or guayabas or some of these fruits that you picked from your farm and then used it in the hotel?
So that was like a huge part of my life. Like that's why I think I went down this path, because when I was a kid, we'd have the cooks in the kitchen. I'd wake up in the morning, and different from a lot of people's childhood, I would go into the kitchen. I'd talk to the chef, and I'd say, hey, I want a toronja. Like, he would take the two toronjas, and he'd take all the fruit out, and then he'd pull all the membrane and stuff out, and then he'd just put the fruit back in, put a bunch of brown sugar on top, and I would go pick my own grapefruit. So they would always be like nice and ripe, and that was like just my normal breakfast. But I was kind of a picky eater when I was a kid, which I'm not anymore. But that was definitely something that helped to define me when I was that age. So I didn't like very many things. So I became very close with the chefs or the cooks because I always wanted to taste things before they served it to me. So I would know if I didn't like it. And I learned at a pretty young age that if I didn't like something, if I put enough lemon and salt,
it would taste good.
It would taste good.
What about today? Are you keeping up with that relationship with the chefs at the Chastain?
100%, yeah. I mean, like many of the chefs that I've worked with over the years have become very close friends of mine. So that's always been, like I said, I love that part of it. And I actually originally, when I first moved to the United States and first started working in restaurants when I was 16 years old, I started working as a cook, and I love that. But then I got a little taste of that front of house life, and the strange thing about in this industry is that generally you're going to make more money in the front of house, but most of the time the people in the back of house are going to be the most passionate ones and the most, I wouldn't say talented, but they're going to have the most skills, the most learned skills. And so I always found what they do in the kitchen so fascinating. So that's part of the reason why I'd even that's why I found myself in this career, like where I loved food and then discovered that there was kind of like an in-between career that incorporated food, wine, everything. Because as a sommelier, you got to know your food,
This restaurant is fantastic because no matter where I look, like from the managers to the waiters and waitresses to the hostess to you guys to the chef, everything is like very balanced and very good. So I'm hoping that you can tell me a little bit how is that you balance that, because again, you have recommended some drinks to me that I never heard before that were fantastic, and I'm pretty sure that you have pair wine and food for people that are just based on whatever you smell, taste, or whatever textures. I want to elaborate a little bit on those senses, on those feelings that you have for food and drinks.
Yeah. Well, so when I was growing up in Colombia, my father would, when I was a kid, he would have friends come over to the hotel, for the hosteria for the weekend, and they would play music, and we would sit around, we'd drink. They would drink and they would eat, and I always wanted to participate. So the caveat for me was I would be given like a tiny little copita, and it would usually have like Rioja or some type of Spanish wine in it, and I would be allowed to have a little sip but I always had to take it with food. And once I finished my little cup, there wasn't more, so I'd savor it. So I'd always eat popcorn and cheddar and red wine, so mostly Rioja. And that's not something that would be like a great pairing now. But when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, it was something that I felt very special, like be able to try it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that today some people will be really scared of the childhood experience that you had, okay? That being said, I know from some of the podcasts that whenever you're a child, before you get to first grade, then all the education is based on whatever your senses, whatever you feel, whatever you want to do. And then we go to first grade, and all our education becomes linear, meaning you have to learn math, you have to learn,
and you have to learn at the same rate that everybody else around you, which doesn't make a lot of sense if you know what children like. So
were you able to balance those two, like the education based on senses, based on the copita, and all these, because all that information you got it when you were before like 5 or 6 or whatever. So I'm pretty sure that you were lucky enough to get all these different feelings and different senses. Very well trained by the time you were young, but you kept it up, and then you came back to it.
Well, I mentioned the little pairing because that's not the only pairing I'll talk about, but that one when I was a kid, it's something that I still remember from such a young age. I can picture the room, I can hear the music, and I remember like being like little square of cheddar, little 2 pieces of popcorn, and I just learned to appreciate it at an early age. So when you're learning about wine pairings as an adult, or as someone that's trying to do this as a professional, or if you're just learning about it because you want to be able to host a good dinner party or anything like that, you just want to be a good cook and you want to be able to put something nice on the table. I think people start trying to learn about it from books, which is the wrong way to do it. You have to start off with the foundation of like something that you've experienced, and then that gives you kind of like, once you have that aha moment, then you build upon that. That becomes your foundation. And having discovered that at such a young age, I always was like somebody, even as a teenager, once I moved to the United States, and then later on, I was always somebody that wanted to try two different things together.
Okay.
So I remember when I was a kid, nacho cheesy or Doritos and a Coke was like my favorite thing.
I got you.
Salty, sweet,
All these different flavors and all the association of these flavors is what is like fascinates me.
Yeah.
Because inside you have to know not only all them individually, but how they pair up or how they taste together.
Yeah.
And you probably, that's something that I don't see many kids or adults now focusing on. So I wanted to see if there is any advice for parents, for educators, for kids to go use their hands to pick fruits, to cook with those fruits, experience different flavors, things that will enhance their senses and the way they learn about things by doing.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to that, I think even people that don't think that they know how to pair things together, I think they do, and we have to think about like the really basic things that we've learned. Like if you grew up in the United States, or if you lived in the United States for any point in time, like one of the most classic flavor combinations is going to be milk and Oreos, right? and this is, so there's two ways to pair things, right? Or there's multiple ways, but there's two general ways to pair things. It's going to be contrast, or things that harmonize, right? Things that are very different but go well together, or two things that are just two peas in a pod.
Okay.
And so you look for one or the other, or possibly even like a small combination of both. So let's see, a really classic combination, if you start reading about wine, and one of the first things you'll read about is, if you go to France and you go to the Loire Valley in the Muscadet region, in the Pays Nantais, which is where the Loire Valley, goes into the Atlantic Ocean, that this is an estuary, so it's a natural place to harvest mussels, clams, and oysters. And once you go to the bistros there and you get around, that's the fare that they serve. And then you drink Muscadet with it, which is a very, very light wine. It's very mineral driven. It's very crisp and refreshing. It's got subtle citrus flavors, but not much. And then when you have that with an oyster, an oyster is a little bit salty, depending on what variety of oyster it is. You're generally going to get flavors of like a melon, of grass, of citrus. You might get some of those like slightly like iodine salty notes,
Okay.
Which kind of associate with the ocean flavor. And then a glass of Muscadet is going to be perfect for that because it's crisp, it's lean. So it's the oyster is such a delicate thing that you need a wine that is going to hold its hand. It's not going to overwhelm it. It's not going to overpower it. It's not going to put it down. And so that is like one classic pairing that everybody should try, and it's easy to try because most any restaurant that focuses on oysters is probably going to have a Muscadet that you can buy. So that's something that I encourage people to try. But then like a totally different pairing, instead of like harmony, something that like kind of contrast. So Cabernet does not taste like steak, right?
Okay.
They have there's not really a lot of harmony there, right? But you've had a beautiful glass of Cabernet Sauvignon with a nice ribeye before.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's perfect.
Okay. And one of the things is, because that's completely empiric, and I want to know what the fundamentals, like basis of this knowledge, because now you change locations. You go from Cali, Colombia, to France, to now the United States. Or when you talk about ribeyes and oysters and other foods, and we talk about fruits that were very Caribbean-like or Colombian-like. But then this knowledge can go with you to whatever location you are. It doesn't set. So I want to see if there is, how do you take that knowledge with you?
Well, I mean, that's one of the things, what I mentioned earlier is I decided that I want to be a sommelier, and I really like the hospitality aspect of it. So I wanted to work on the restaurant floor for at least 10 years as a sommelier. And I finally got there, 2 or 3 years ago. And that's the thing. It becomes such second nature to you, that you don't have to, think about it. It just kind of becomes something you're like, oh, this is natural. And I think it takes a long time to get to that point. And once you get to that point, it's a good feeling, when you're like, okay, I'm finally there. And
But you sounded like a professional soccer player or somebody that does it just intuitive. It's something that was learned and very, very well learned inside you that you can use it just as you do breathing or any other regular activity.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way I feel about it now. But I can think back to trying so hard to become a professional, trying so hard to learn everything. There's so much information when it comes to the world of wine, and you just kind of feel like you're faking it till you make it in the very beginning. And I think most people are, because there's too much information.
I feel like a little Rioja right now, man.
That sounds good to me. Let's try some. All right, so
Can you tell us a little bit about that wine?
So this is one of my favorite wines that we pour here at the Chastain, Marqués de Murieta. I have a couple other wines. This is the Reserva 2017. So I am biased when it comes to Marqués de Murieta because my cousin Alejandra Naranjo works for them. And but regardless of that, when I was learning about wine, what I learned was that when it comes to Rioja, Marqués de Murieta is like the avant-garde, but they are the best of the best, And Rioja is a region that haven't been, so I speak, having learned from books, but it's a region that is steeped in tradition. But there are some newer style producers, and they're elevating the game for everybody. Not everybody wants to follow suit and change their style, so you kind of have two very distinct styles within the region. And this is what I would consider to be the more modern style. I don't know how they would feel about me saying that,
It's okay. But I mean, this.
Salud.
Cheers. Salud. What is Rioja? I know that most people cannot differentiate between a region or a grape or whatever. So what do you think Rioja?
Rioja is it's very unique. One of the things that'll set Rioja apart from most wine regions in the world, not all, but the majority of them, is a commitment to this old world style, even for a modern producer. That earthiness that you get from the wine, think about it like this. You get that earthiness, right?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Think about the fact this wine probably sat in barrel for about 3 years. Think about the barrel with the wine inside of it. Think of it as like a cell. Think of sitting in the cellar in the process of aging in there. Mm-hmm. Think of osmosis.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Cells want to regulate between what is outside and what is inside. They want to find a stasis, right? They want to find.
So it's transfer of flavor between the cellar and the wine?
Even slowly, even in a cellar, there's going to be subtle temperature variations, right? What happens when the temperature varies? Cells contract and they expand. Mm-hmm. Even in a very, very microscopic level, mm-hmm. There's going to be a subtle transfer of oxygen. And that oxygen that's coming in, this wine smells like you just walked into the cellar mm-hmm. of Marqués de Murieta.
Oh.
So
fantastic.
The osmosis happened. Oh. It absorbed it. But it takes years. Some producers might leave the wine in the barrel for 10 years or longer. And then you're going to have more of that, So if this was a crianza, it would taste very different. It'd be fruity, lighter, just more juvenile wine. This is a more serious wine. It's only 2017, so it's a 6-year-old wine, but it's still a 6-year-old wine. And this is the current wine that they're selling as their Reserva. So they have made this 6 years ago, and now they're just now getting paid for it.
Okay.
So this is a business decision that's gonna affect the business big time. You're gonna have to put a lot of work in the beginning to get the reward after. But if you do it right, this is a beautiful thing.
What is that you do in a daily, weekly, monthly basis mm-hmm. to keep encouraging all your senses to keep learning, to keep collecting this information, because it's obvious that you have to do your smell. I mean, the way you look at people, because I know if people are different, then you have to pair different things.
Yeah.
One of the great things that you said when you saw me here eating is like, I look at you and this is what I recommend. So any and all senses you enhance every day. What do you do every day to keep enhancing your senses?
So I don't focus on it as much now as I did when I first started in the career, when I was trying to figure everything out. But I would do, I would go to I used to work at a place called Restaurant Eugene, and we kept a huge spice rack in the back. And excuse me, about once a week, I would go in the back and I would just smell everything, just to be like, a lot of people say when they taste a Rioja that they can taste dill, and that's associated with the American oak, I guess. That's something that I've never really been able to pick up, and it just drives me nuts.
It was bad wine. They just never told you that.
Yeah, could be. I just never picked it up. But that was one way, and I started that early on in my career. I would go to the grocery store, and this sounds bad now, especially after COVID, but I would pick up everything and smell it, tomatoes, lemons, oranges, everything. And so there's ways to develop your palate like that. In retrospect, now that I look back, and now that I've become a sommelier, I always used to play a game when I was a kid, not always, but most of the time, where I would go home, and when I'd come home, if my mother was cooking dinner, I would try to guess what was being cooked right after I walked in the door. I couldn't see the kitchen. But that was always because I have always had a strong sense of smell. And so I would kind of get excited. I'd come home. My mother would make this dish that was like shallots and chicken thighs with rosemary. And we would cook it in the slow cooker in the crock pot all day, put it on in the morning, let it cook all day. And you'd come home at night and the chicken would be falling apart. It would be super delicious. We had a ton of olive oil in it, and then we would dip bread in it. And so that was my favorite thing. So I'd come home and I'd be like, I smell rosemary, I smell caramelized onions, I smell chicken roasting, and I'd be like, oh, is this what we're having for dinner? And she'd be like, you're close. And every now and then I would guess exactly what it was, but not every time. Very rarely would I guess everything every time.
You were training. You
But
were
I
getting
was
your
just
senses
developing
educated.
a sense, that I had, and I enjoyed it. Also, in Colombia we grew up. I'm assuming everybody grows. Maybe, but I had my own cologne when I was 13 years old. I wore Gucci. My best friend wore Fahrenheit.
No, trust me, I know what you're talking about. 100%.
My other friend wore Cool Water, but we weren't allowed to have the same smell because we all want to have our own personality. So maybe it's just a different upbringing. But I remember that.
I mean, I also know that sometimes you are in a party, in a club, or even in a tennis match, and somebody walks with the cologne that some of your friends or your girlfriend from the childhood used, and immediately you get a sense of proximity from that person. It's insane.
My abuelita used to wear a perfume called Shalimar by Guerlain, and every about 2 years, somebody will walk in wearing that. It's always an older lady. I shouldn't say that in case but I always go, I'm like, is that Shalimar by Guerlain? They're like, yeah. How do you know? I'm like, I can't forget that smell. Reminds me of my grandmother. Same thing.
Fantastic, man.
Guy walks in wearing Fahrenheit. Reminds me of my buddy, growing up. That's something that I have, and I've developed it, but it helps if, you start off with a good palate and a good nose.
You developed it pretty well because you were just named the best sommelier of 2023 by the Michelin-starred. So, and can you tell me, what do you think brought you to be awarded the best?
Well, what I had mentioned earlier about the different aspects of this career, Michelin's looking for somebody that's in a restaurant, that's working the floor, and that is got a command of their career, their job. Or I'm assuming, I had no idea that they were even doing that. So when I got the award, I was completely blown away, totally flabbergasted. Just I didn't still kind of lose words. But then, I asked the lady from the Michelin Guide, and she said they started doing it about 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, because they wanted to recognize people in the front of the house. Because I wanted to be in this career, because I specifically wanted to be a sommelier, and I love the restaurant industry, and I love the hospitality industry, I wanted to be on the floor for at least 10 years, as I mentioned. So I have been on the floor and working as a sommelier for over 10 years, 12, 13 years now. And that's not something you're going to find in a lot of people in town. most everybody else always takes like general manager slash sommelier.
But it's not that easy because you need a lot of empirical knowledge. You got to be out there with your chefs, with your customers. You got to be a friend with all the waiters and waiters. I mean, you have to do a lot of stuff, but you do have to be in between.
Yeah.
And you have to know it all, really.
One thing I have to say about the sommelier career, and I'm sure a lot of careers that are like this, it is imperative that you never ever stop learning, that you never stop like seeking knowledge, you know? So any opportunity that you get that you can partake in, because it's easy to get burned out in this industry when you first start, because you will get a lot of educational opportunities. You'll get invited to a lot of tastings. You might get invited to different wine growing regions around the world, depending on, you know, what your buying power is and, you know, what the motivation is for somebody to take you to France or take you to Spain or wherever. So you have to find first a balance, but you have to make it a point of your whole life to like always be looking for like, all right, what else? You know, like what else can I learn? The other thing too is, if you're going to be in this career, a lot of people develop big egos because there isn't that many people within this career. So with the relatively small group of professionals in any given market, it's easy to see yourself as like, oh, you know, I'm badass because I'm at this place or this or that.
It'd be hard to say that to you, man.
Well, but the thing is, but I meet sommeliers like that all the time, and I don't like them, you know, because it's like, when you meet new people, it's like you want to be like, okay, what can I learn from you, and what can you learn from me? Yeah. So you find a way to work together, but it just, you have to be on a level playing field. And if somebody comes to you and they don't know very much, you can still learn from them. You know, you can learn a lot from teaching.
You'll be surprised, yeah, and plus, probably you spend a lot of time learning about doing things. You know, empirical knowledge is something that I feel is not very well seen. You know, because working with your hands, working with your senses, you know, it wasn't well paid. Now, I think the times have changed, and this type of service, this type of knowledge is very needed. And that's the reason why I'm thinking, okay, if we keep improving the way we smell, the way we taste, the way we feel textures, and all these things, it can increase and improve the way we live as well as the way we get educated, okay? I was going to ask you a question about any other wine that you recommend somewhere around the world. I know that we have this fantastic Rioja, and then you were mentioning about another wine that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, just like 3 hours ago, just by coincidence, you know, that we were doing this today, and this happened today, but we had a winemaker that was in town, and I was originally going to have lunch with her and other sommeliers from the city, but then a couple things came up, and I had to come to work a little bit early. Yeah, let me see that. So just because she was just here and she left a bunch of her wine behind, I thought we could talk about them, because this is something that I love. So this is a French wine, and this is from a part of France that, I mean, I didn't know it very well. I'd heard the name before, but the general area in France is kind of the south of France and the the more maritime part. But they're in Vaucluse, and they have a high elevation. They have high elevation vineyards, some of the highest elevations or the highest elevation in France. They're around like 2,500 feet for their highest vineyard, even though they're close to the ocean. So it's a very distinct atmosphere. And they make a beautiful white wine called Alliot. They make a rosé that's been called the best rosé in the world multiple times by the people that would know. With Jancis Robinson, I think, is named the best rosé in the world 4 times. But yeah, so the winemaker, it's a husband and wife team that own and run the winery, Nicole Rollet and Xavier Rollet, and they were here a couple hours ago. So, you know, it's just on the top of my head, and I love these wines. And the thing about these wines, the thing that makes that made the afternoon and meeting with them today special is, by my opinion, because I have now been doing this for 10, 15 years, I've observed things, and I've been able to like pick up on certain patterns. One of the first things that you'll notice in the industry is going to be when you have a really great wine that's relatively new, the price will stay low until you find like a good market, and then the price can get
demand goes
astronomical.
higher, then prices goes higher.
Yeah, supply and demand. So right now they are actually producing some of the best wines in the world. Like I said, her rosé is called one of the best rosé in the world. Their red wines are stunning, and I mean, they're not cheap, but they are also aging. This is like a current release right here, 2015. So they aged it for you. So it's got a ton of character, very expressive wine. This is the Heloy. I also thought there's a parallel to Colombia. So Chêne Bleu means blue oak, which is in the middle of the vineyard. And they make a couple of wines. They're red wines. Well, they have a new one, but the main ones are Heloy and Abelard. And this is a story like if you grew up in Colombia, reading about La Maria, or Maria and Jorge, the Jorge Sachs novel. The tragic love story, which is common. Romeo and Juliet, Heloy and Abelard, all over the world. So their wines are named after two characters that were famous in French history, French literature, where Heloise and Abelard were lovers. And then I think Heloise's father found out about it and had Abelard castrated.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that.
I love mythology too. Like all this.
Well, and I think this is an actual true. This is a true story.
True story.
Yeah, it's just a documented true story. Where I think Heloise was like the daughter. Her father was like a well-known like a religious man, and Abelard was supposed to be her teacher, and then they fell in love and had an illicit affair. But yeah, these wines are so beautiful. This is predominantly 78% Syrah, 18% Grenache, and 4% Roussanne. Syrah is my personal favorite.
Okay.
It's a very funky, sexy wine.
No, yeah, both of them are fantastic. Either or. Now, tell me a little bit about the Chastain, because maybe, again, you talk about your parents, you talk about the hotel, and now you talk about the Chastain. How are these institutions help you developing the senses, and how do you think that institutions in general, can help you to develop whatever empirical skills you have developed?
Well, I mean, we're a relatively new restaurant as the Chastain. We bought the owner bought the property, I think, in 2018. Construction started around 2019. Don't quote me on that because I was not here at the moment. I came on in 2020 when it was still under construction. So I consider this place an institution in the birth.
Okay.
When I was first invited to come be a part of this project, I did a little bit of research, and the restaurant that we started in 2020. Before that, there was a horseradish grill here going back to like 94, 95, something like that. And then before that, there was the Red Barn, which had been renamed from Bill Daley's Red Barn. So there's been a restaurant here since 1946, which makes this one of the oldest food serving establishments in Atlanta. And the fact is, if you look at like the culinary Bible of the South, you could say that it's a book called The Gift of Southern Cooking by Scott Peacock and Edna Lewis. And they worked in this building when it was Horseradish Grill. From what I understand, they even might have written part of the book here. So this is an institution, and just in the birth process, I fully expect that there will be a Chastain here 30 years from now. And when people come here, and whenever you go to a place that is, serious and
Same thing happened with the hotel in Colombia, in Cali. It's also an institution.
Yeah, I mean, it's been there since my little brother's running it now, and he's got to be third generation. So
yeah, no, definitely. So one of the things that I see with people that develop all these senses is they are institutions. They are things that have been in the same families and the same places for many, many years. I don't want people to be discouraged if they say, no, you know what, my family have been doing this restaurant for 100 years or for 200 years, because I know that in the United States, sometimes we want easy, fast, immediate. But in other countries, like we talk about Colombia or even Japan, people really develop businesses and develop families for many, many, many years. I heard stories where, our business is just starting. We're only 65 years old, in the business.
There's a hotel in Japan that's like over 2,000 years old, do I remember correctly?
Yeah. So that's the situation. Is people in Japan and other places, they don't expect all this level of success to be, next day. So one of the situations is you have to keep every day learning new things, experiencing new things, and developing the senses. If there is something that you can tell kids, educators, or even parents about the use of the senses for the professional career.
I mean, it's going to be like any tool, you know? You have to, if you're a singer and then you stop singing for 3 years, or, you drink and smoke too much, like, you're going to lose that. So it's the same thing, I have, in my career in the sommelier world, you oftentimes will go to tasting groups where everybody brings a wine. You don't tell each other what it is. Everybody, pours their wine, and then you smell it, you taste it, and then you try to guess what it is. You go through the grid. Using some similar, faction or some similar system where you just have to keep working on it all the time.
You did it with your family, with your mother's cooking. Now you do it with your friends.
Well, and I've done it when I was at Restaurant Eugene. We used to do tasting menus, so chefs would come up with a new dish, and we'd taste it and be like, okay, I think this is what'll go well with that. And then we would grab the wine and grab the food and try a little bit of both. And that's a really good way to learn. But you won't be able to do that in every restaurant. But even if you're in a restaurant and you don't have a tasting menu and the chefs aren't presenting you with every new dish, you can still,
But it looks like you've done it all your life with guavas, with grapefruit, with fish, with food. So I don't think that needs to be in a restaurant. I think that enhancing and training your senses could be done every day.
Oh, 100%. And honestly, I think I gravitated towards it because I already had a good sense of smell. So, when I walk outside, I'm like, I can't hide from it, It's kind of like you see those videos of the people that get those glasses and they can see color for the first time, and they're just like, oh my God.
Nice.
When you have a sense and it's well developed and well defined, you enjoy it, but you have to go out there and develop it. I love seeing beautiful things. I love smelling beautiful things. I love tasting amazing things. I think I just love the beauty of life. And this was just one way that I could naturally make it a part of my career.
Man, this is fantastic because I was talking to a psychologist, and she's been in my podcast a few times. And then she's like, Mario, sometimes I ask people, smell two things. And they look around and they never make the motion of smelling.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, how can you be so unaware? You can smell your hands, you can smell the air, you can smell anything. And many people just forget that there is something out there to smell, something out there to taste, something out there to feel.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like, I'm like one of those people that like walking barefoot outside because it just makes me feel alive. So I love anything that excites my senses. So,
Man,
falling into this career was a natural thing,
You're a very accomplished empiric, and I am so glad that I met you. Thank you very much for being in this podcast, and hopefully this is the first of many meetings, man.
Love it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Salud.
Salud.